Hello, welcome to the story of a society that has a just solution. Tonight, though, we turn slightly closer to now. A modern tale, still soft, still slow, but meaningful. Let your thoughts settle, breathe deeply, and let this story unfold like a court transcript read very, very slowly. If you enjoy falling asleep to the calmest corners of the past, gently tap subscribe. And now. They beat him on the street, but the courtroom gave him justice. He can still feel the strike against his ribs, sharp, unforgiving, a sound that echoed not just in his body, but in the silence that followed. It was a Tuesday afternoon in downtown Chicago. Malik Thompson, 27, was walking home from work, an argument over rent still fresh in his mind, when the world shifted in an instant. He saw them first. 3 men in their 20s, shadows under the overpass, faces twisted not by fear or anger, but by something hungry and mean. They didn't ask for help. They didn't argue. They assaulted him without warning, blows to his shoulder, fists to his chest. One kicked him in the face. The knee drove into his side, and he collapsed to the cracked concrete. His cheek burned. The world spun. And above everything else, in that moment, he felt something worse than pain. He felt invisible. No one came forward. No one shouted. No one called out. The city sidewalk kept breathing, indifferent to the violence it hosted. A stranger finally knelt, helping Malik to his feet. His shirt was soaked in blood and shame, but the man's hand was steady. He called an ambulance. He held Malik's phone so he could call his mother. And in that small act of connection, Malik found a spark of faith in humanity amid the wreckage. In the hospital, Malik learned more than medical charts and bruised ribs. He learned he couldn't afford time off work. The beating revealed fractures, ribs, a broken nose. The doctor said he needed rest. But Malik crunched numbers in his head: rent, food, tuition. He had no backup, no savings. Financial reality. It looks like you encountered a system error just now, but we're back and running. Would you like me to continue the story, generate the description and tags, or help with something else like thumbnail subtitle or image prompt? For CapCut, based on the script titled, They Beat Him on the Street. But the courtroom gave him justice. He spent the night in a cheap motel near the hospital, where the floors were countertop sticky and the sheets always smelled like regret. He kept replaying the attack in his mind, the way the world looked like it could have swallowed him whole. But in the darkness, he made himself a promise. He would not let that moment define him. He would not become a victim of someone else's cruelty. The next morning, he woke before the sun, bandaged face swollen, fists aching. He dragged himself to the courthouse, where the graffiti-covered steps were lined with people who'd fallen through the cracks. Others waiting for a chance to be seen, to be heard. He was one of them now. He sat in the gallery, listening as victims and defendants told pieces of their truth. When his name was called, his legs shook, not from pain, but from gravity. He stood and faced the 3 men who had assaulted him. Face masks no longer helpful. There was no hiding the scars. One of his attackers tried to sneer. Malik felt the old fear rise, but he shut it down. He had come here to speak, not to dance, with terror. In his testimony, he spoke plainly. He described their voices. He described the weight of each blow. He described the sharp sting of betrayal, how people passed without looking, how the city seemed to shrug and say, he deserved no better. He described what it felt like to become a ghost on your own street. He didn't ask for pity. He didn't ask for outrage. He asked for justice. Evidence followed: the stranger's witness statement, the ambulance photos, the doctor's report, but also the security footage from a nearby business. It didn't show the entire assault, but it showed 2 of the attackers talking in front of the camera, their jackets soaked with blood. It showed Malik Omanda across the screen, walking unarmed, nothing blurred, no evidence of provocation. That footage shifted something in the courtroom. It didn't roar. It whispered. It reminded people what truth looks like, even when it's hard to watch. The defense lawyer argued provocation. Malik's truth was consistent. No reaction, no fight, no justification, but self-protection. After hours of testimony, they adjourned. Jury deliberation began. Malik felt the weight of 1,000 moments inside him. Pain, shame, loneliness, redemption. When they returned, the jurors didn't wear angry faces. They wore quiet certainty. The foreperson spoke words Malik will never forget. The defendants were guilty on all counts: assault, battery, hate crime enhancements for racial slurs directed at Malik during the attack. They had beaten a black man, walking home, and the law had seen that as injustice, not equal confusion. Justice felt heavy. It didn't bring Malik back what was taken, his health, his fear, but it redistributed something he thought lost: dignity. The judge handed down a sentence that echoed in the quiet courtroom, then paused and said, "Mr. Thompson, your courage has reminded us who we are supposed to be. We thank you for letting truth speak." Malik's version of winning didn't come with triumph. It came with stillness, with a breath that didn't shake, with the knowledge that a city could still witness, could still listen. Outside, lights flashed as a small crowd had gathered, some carrying signs that read, "Justice for Malik," others holding their phones, sharing every moment. But Malik slipped through them quietly. He didn't need to roar, he only needed to breathe. In the weeks that followed, his injuries healed, his wallet stayed thin, his rent still due. But something had changed. His balance had shifted, not physically, but inside. He walked differently. He looked people in the eyes. He said hello to the man who sold lattes, to the crossing guard, to the kid who watched him get beaten from behind a fence, paralyzed by fear. He returned to work. Gradually, carefully. The boss kept his position open. Co-workers asked how he was. He told them truth. It hurt, but people can still choose to listen. He started attending a local group for survivors of violence. He found others who'd been hurt and still had fire inside them. They called themselves the Resilience Collective. Malik became a regular. He spoke at community events. He led guided meditations for trauma survivors, teaching them that self-discipline didn't mean ignoring the pain. It meant learning how to live with it, how to grow from it. He practiced mindfulness through wake-ups at 5 a.m., going for walks through empty streets, feeling the city breathe before it woke. He paused at street corners where he'd been attacked, bowed his head and said, "You can walk here again. You're safe." Other people started to join. They came to those same streets, walking. They didn't need to talk. They just needed to walk and breathe and remember that a moment of violence didn't own them. Months later, he filed a personal injury lawsuit, not for money, but because he needed the courtroom one more time. To tell his truth again, when it mattered. This time the jury awarded a modest settlement, but more importantly, the defendants paid legal fees and completed community service at the Resilience Collective. On the anniversary of the attack, the Resilience Collective held a vigil under the same overpass, now cleaned and painted in bright colours with Malik's favourite poem etched along the pillars. "You are not simply what happened to you." People gathered, survivors, strangers, neighbours, each sharing moments of hurt and healing. Malik spoke last. "We didn't come here to relive the worst day of my life," he said quietly. "We came to stand for the next one, to say we are not broken, that our lives are still ours." And in that stillness, even the echoes felt held. He didn't speak again for a moment, but he didn't need to. The truth was already being carried in their silence. He didn't expect what followed next. Not the attention, not the messages from strangers, not the schoolteacher from Milwaukee who emailed, saying her students watched his courtroom testimony and cried. Not the veteran from Georgia who said he'd stayed silent about his own assault until he heard Malik speak. Not the mother in Baltimore who said she feared for her son's safety every time he walked to school, and that Malik's story gave her the courage to talk to the principal about policing and race. Malik never asked to be a symbol, but now he understood something deeper. When you speak your truth, it doesn't just echo, it ripples. He was invited to a local college to speak to criminal justice students. At first, he said no. What did he know about teaching? But after a week of sleepless nights, he said yes. And when he stood at the front of that classroom, students half listening, half scrolling, he didn't lecture. He told a story. He told them what it felt like to be invisible, to be bleeding on the sidewalk while people walked past, afraid or unwilling to stop. He asked them, "What kind of world do you want to build when you graduate?" Then he sat in silence. The scrolling stopped. The silence swelled, and something changed in that room. From there, he started doing more. He visited high schools, led healing circles in community centers, partnered with therapists and trauma counselors to develop peer-led support groups for young men, especially black and brown boys who had experienced violence but didn't trust the system enough to say so. He wasn't just telling his story anymore. He was making space for others to tell theirs. And through all of it, Malik never forgot the power of routine. He woke up early, always, meditated, wrote. Some mornings he cried. Some mornings he laughed at nothing. Some mornings he stared at the sky and said, "I'm still here." That was enough. He started journaling again, filling notebooks with everything from court transcripts to letters he'd never send to the boys who beat him. His therapist encouraged him to publish excerpts. A local publisher picked it up, and soon his small book, Breathing Through the Blow, found its way onto nightstands and library shelves across the country. He wasn't a celebrity, he wasn't rich, but he was free. He had reclaimed his name, not Malik the victim, not Malik the lawsuit, but Malik the man who survived with his dignity intact. There was one moment, nearly a year after the trial, that told him just how far he'd come. He was walking home, same route, same overpass. This time, a police cruiser slowed beside him. His heart leapt. Old panic, old memories. The window rolled down. "Mr. Thompson." He turned. A female officer leaned out, smiling gently. "I've read about you. Just wanted to say thank you." He nodded. The cruiser pulled off. No sirens, no fear, just breath. That night, he sat with his mother, who'd flown in for the anniversary. They ate takeout and watched the sun set from his balcony. "You've changed," she said softly. "I hope so," he replied. She smiled. "No, I mean it. You're not just surviving anymore." He looked at her. "No, I'm not. I'm living." Because here's what Malik learned, what he wanted everyone to know. You don't heal by pretending it didn't happen. You heal by remembering that you're more than what did. You're the morning after. You're the voice that speaks up. You're the silence that refuses to shrink. And sometimes, you're the man who walks the same road, unafraid. He hadn't intended to keep telling the story forever, but every time he did, something in the room shifted. At one event, a man approached him afterward, mid-50s, suit and tie, clearly someone from the corporate world. The man's eyes were glassy. He extended a hand and said, "I'm the reason my son stopped speaking to me. I didn't believe him when he said he was mistreated. But after hearing you, I finally listened. I called him last night." Malik shook his hand. "Then I'm glad I spoke." Another time, at a youth shelter in Newark, he sat cross-legged, on a worn carpet as boys circled around, arms crossed, eyes skeptical. But he didn't try to win them over. He simply said, "I thought I'd never trust people again. I thought justice wasn't real. I thought my life was broken, but I'm still standing. And so are you." And one by one, the boys unfolded. Stories poured out, of fathers gone, of mothers tired, of nights without sleep, and fights just to make it home from school. Malik didn't promise them easy answers. He just promised to listen. By year 3, he was running workshops in schools, courthouses, even police academies. He didn't preach. He asked questions. Have you ever been afraid to walk home? Have you ever been punished for surviving? Do you know what it feels like to be seen as a threat before you've spoken a word? Some officers shifted uncomfortably, some nodded, and some, quietly, after the room had emptied, pulled him aside to say, "Thank you, I needed that." Malik never softened the truth. He didn't dull his words to make them more palatable, but he never weaponized them either. He spoke with precision, with clarity, with the kind of strength that comes from surviving, not just pain, but the temptation to become bitter. The truth, he learned, is not a blade. It's a light. And once it's turned on, it's hard to go back to the dark. One day, he returned to the courtroom, not as a plaintiff, but as a guest speaker. It was a special session for law students and young attorneys. As he stood before them, in the very room where his justice had been decided, he paused. "This room changed my life," he said, "not because of what happened to me, but because of what I chose to do with it afterward." He told them that the law isn't just about verdicts. It's about people, about whether the system can see the whole human story, not just the headlines. And he asked them, "What kind of stories will you stand up for?" When he finished, there was no applause, just stillness. And then slowly, one by one, they stood up. He left the courtroom that day with a single thought. Justice isn't a destination, it's a discipline. Malik kept writing, speaking, guiding, but he also made space for joy, something he'd once thought was lost to him forever. He started hiking, gardening. He adopted a dog from a shelter, called her Liberty, because she limped when she walked but ran when she trusted. Some nights, he still woke up in sweat. Trauma, he learned, wasn't linear. It looped, but he had tools now. Breath, words, people, and above all, he had purpose. He used his story not to center himself, but to shine a light on others, on those still silenced, still waiting for someone to believe them. His foundation funded therapy for assault survivors, paid legal fees, trained peer mediators, gave kids a space to talk without judgment. And years later, when Liberty passed away, he wrote, "She taught me something the world tried to take, how to run toward life." He didn't plan to build a legacy, at least not at first. Malik had spent so long trying to survive the moment, he hadn't imagined what came after healing. But once the noise of survival faded, once the anger settled into clarity, space opened up for something more enduring, something rooted not just in response, but in intention. It began quietly, like most things that matter. He was asked to mentor a teenager named Darnell, just another black boy with a record thicker than his school file, they said. Suspended 4 times, mother working 2 jobs, no father at home. Cops already knew him by name, a case waiting to happen. Malik met him on a grey Tuesday. Darnell didn't say much, just sat across the table, hoodie pulled tight over his head, arms folded, eyes down. He was 15 but looked older, hard edges carved by too many grown-up nights. "You don't have to talk," Malik told him, "but I will. You can listen, or not. But I'm going to tell you something real." And he did. He told Darnell about the concrete, the fists, the way humiliation can bruise deeper than a punch. He told him about crying alone, about begging the system to see him, about thinking of giving up. But mostly, he talked about the choice to keep going. When he finished, Darnell lifted his head. "No one's ever talked to me like that." Malik smiled. "Then let's make that the first of many." That relationship changed everything, because Darnell wasn't a case. He was a mirror, and in guiding him, Malik saw his younger self, raw, angry, desperate for dignity. That connection lit a fire. He created a program, Bridges Beyond the System. It started with just 5 boys, all at risk, all marked by the world before they ever had a chance to define themselves. They met weekly, not to be corrected, but to be heard. Each session focused on truth. Truth about the system, about trauma, about survival, about strength. And then they wrote poems, essays, speeches, letters to their younger selves. One of them, a boy named Jason, wrote, "They said I was a problem, but maybe I was just a lesson nobody wanted to learn." Malik read it and wept. That year, 2 boys from the program got into college. One became a social worker. Another started his own podcast called Unbroken. Malik's name began to circulate, not as a victim, but as a leader. He was invited to national panels, sat on reform committees, even testified before a House Committee on Justice and Racial Profiling. But the spotlight didn't interest him. Every time a camera turned on, he thought of Darnell. He thought of the nights no one was looking, when kids were deciding whether to fight or fade. He wanted to be there for that moment, the moment the world wasn't watching. That's why he turned down a book deal from a major publisher. Instead, he self-published a workbook called The Power of Still Standing, a guide for youth who'd been through trauma, system abuse, or street violence. Free PDF. Anyone could download it. Thousands did. Teachers began using it in classrooms, therapists in group sessions. Parents printed it and read it with their kids. Malik's words were no longer just his story. They were a bridge for others to walk across. Still, he stayed grounded. He lived in the same neighborhood, still went to the same barber, still sat on his stoop on Sundays with a cup of coffee, nodding at passers-by. Sometimes a neighbor would stop and say, "You really changed, man." He'd shake his head. "No," he'd say. "I just finally came back to who I was before the world tried to change me." He started dating again, something he'd avoided for years. Trust was a mountain he wasn't sure he could climb again. But then he met Camille, a therapist who worked with trauma survivors. They met at a community roundtable. She was the only one who challenged him that day, questioning a point he'd made about forgiveness. "I think sometimes we talk about healing too quickly," she'd said. "Some wounds deserve more than bandages. They need time." He liked her immediately. Their connection wasn't fast, but it was deep. They talked for hours, shared stories, cried, laughed at things they never thought they could laugh about. When he told her about the night on the street, she didn't flinch. She just listened. When he finished, she reached out and held his hand. "Thank you for surviving," she whispered. It was the most intimate thing anyone had ever said to him. As Malik's story grew beyond the neighborhood, his voice began to echo in places he never thought he'd be welcomed. He was invited to speak at universities, not just as a survivor, but as a teacher of lived truth. Law schools wanted to hear what it felt like to sit in a courtroom as a victim, while the system spoke in language it never taught him. Police academies began bringing him in to speak to cadets, some skeptical, some defensive, but many deeply moved. At one academy in Chicago, a young officer approached him after his session. "I joined to protect people," she said, "but hearing you made me realize how easy it is to become part of the problem." Malik nodded slowly. "Then keep remembering why you joined," he told her, "and listen more than you speak." He never claimed to have all the answers, but his questions had power. Why are some kids taught to survive police, while others are taught to trust them? Why does justice feel like a privilege, not a promise? Those questions led him to join forces with legal activists and educators across the country. Together, they launched a platform called See Me First. It offered resources to reform school discipline, rethink policing, and reimagine how communities respond to conflict. Their message was simple. Before you judge me, see me. But not everything was easy. One fall, a news outlet published a hit piece about Malik, twisting his past to paint him as a radical agitator. They cherry-picked his speeches, edited clips out of context, and tried to reignite fear around his message. The smear campaign stung. For a moment, it brought Malik back to that helpless feeling of being silenced, misrepresented, discarded. He considered stepping back, quieting down, but Camille wouldn't let him. "You didn't build this voice to hide it," she said, "and they're not attacking you. They're afraid of your truth." So, he didn't retreat. Instead, he doubled down, releasing a video message on his own platform. I was beaten once in the street, and now you want to beat my story. But let me remind you, truth can't be unspoken once it's heard. This isn't about me. It's about every kid who doesn't have a microphone, so I'm staying right here. The response was overwhelming. Thousands reposted the video. Former students, parents, even police officers wrote in to support him. One message simply read, "Your voice saved my son's life." That's when Malik realized. This was no longer just his journey. It was a movement. He continued to write, but now with a broader lens. His next publication was titled "We Are the Testimony," a collection of essays, interviews, and stories from people across the country who had survived injustice and turned pain into purpose. Camille wrote the foreword. By then, they were married. A quiet ceremony, just close family and friends. Malik wore a navy suit, a small gold pin over his heart, shaped like a bridge. After the vows, Camille whispered, "You don't just survive anymore, love. You lead." They bought a small home with a wide porch, perfect for late-night conversations and early morning peace. Not long after, they welcomed a daughter, Liana. Holding her for the first time, Malik cried in a way he never had, not out of pain, but hope. Here she was, a new beginning, untouched by the systems that had tried to erase him. He made her a promise that night, rocking her gently in his arms. "I will spend the rest of my life making this world safer for you to be fully you." Parenthood gave Malik a new urgency. His advocacy sharpened, not louder but deeper. He began focusing on policy, pushing for statewide reforms in school policing, juvenile justice, and racial profiling laws. When asked how he balanced family and activism, he replied, "I don't balance them, I blend them. My daughter's future is why I do this." And it was true. Every speech, every panel, every classroom visit, he carried Liana in his heart. His story wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a guidepost, a way forward. Years later, during a national justice summit, Malik took the stage to a standing ovation. Not for what he had suffered, but for what he had built. He looked out into the crowd, then paused. "I was once defined by what was done to me," he said, "but I've learned that real justice isn't just a verdict. It's a life reclaimed, and I reclaimed mine." Years passed, and Malik's name became synonymous with resilience, justice, and the transformative power of truth. But even as accolades accumulated, awards from national civil rights groups, honorary degrees, standing invitations to conferences, he remained grounded, because the most meaningful change, he believed, happened quietly, in classrooms, in kitchens, in one-on-one conversations. He began spending more time mentoring young leaders, those with fire in their eyes and stories on their backs. One of them, a high school senior named Deshawn, reminded Malik of himself. Deshawn had been suspended for threatening behavior. In truth, he had stood up for a classmate being bullied by a teacher. The school saw rebellion. Malik saw courage. "You want to fight the system or change it?" Malik asked him. "Both," Deshawn replied. Malik smiled. "Then let's start with your voice." Under Malik's mentorship, Deshawn started a student justice coalition. They organized listening circles with teachers, rewrote the school's code of conduct, and implemented peer-led conflict resolution. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for Malik, that ripple effect was everything. Back at home, Liana was growing fast. At 8, she was already asking questions most adults avoided. "Daddy, why were you hurt before?" Malik took a deep breath. "Because some people couldn't see me as human," he said. "But I fought so you'd never feel that." Liana frowned. "But if someone hurts me, will they get in trouble?" "Not just trouble," he said. "They'll face truth, and truth always wins in the end." That night, he tucked her in and watched her sleep. So peaceful, so unafraid. And for a brief moment, Malik allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the world was bending the way it should. When Liana turned 13, she asked to speak at a youth leadership conference. Malik offered to help her write her speech. "I've already written it," she said, holding up her notebook. On stage, with Malik in the front row, Liana spoke with clarity beyond her years. "My father always says justice is a life reclaimed, but I think it's also a seed. He planted one in me, and now I'm planting more. Not everyone will water it, but I will, and I won't stop until the garden grows big enough for everyone." Tears welled in Malik's eyes, not tears of pride, but of purpose fulfilled. That night, he walked home beside Camille, hand in hand. "You know," she said, "you didn't just survive history, you helped rewrite it." Malik stopped and looked at her under the street lamp. "No," he replied. "We did." Years later, a journalist asked Malik what legacy he hoped to leave. He thought for a long time before answering, "I want to be remembered not for what I endured, but for what I created out of it. A voice, a movement, a daughter who believes in a future bigger than fear." And in the end, that was his true justice. Not in a verdict, not in a court, but in the lives he helped transform. Because sometimes the most powerful testimony doesn't come from the witness stand. It comes from the people who rise again and again after the world tries to silence them. It comes from the courage to keep walking into rooms where your presence is questioned, your truth is doubted, and your worth is ignored, yet still speak with dignity. Malik's story didn't end with a courtroom victory or public applause. It continued in the subtle shifts of a society waking up to its reflection. It lived in policies rewritten, in training sessions led by survivors instead of consultants, in officers who now wore body cameras not out of fear, but out of accountability. He began receiving letters, handwritten ones, from strangers, from mothers who said, "You gave me hope that my son's life will matter," from teachers who said, "Because of your story, I changed how I see my students," from former police officers who wrote, "I left the force, but I carry your story with me every day." Malik read them all, every single one. Not because they praised him, but because they reminded him pain turned into purpose has the power to echo. Even years later, he'd walk into a grocery store and see someone whisper to their child, "That's him. That's the man who changed everything." And still, he would shake his head softly, smile, and reply, "No. I'm just a man who refused to stay silent." One day, Liana, now a young adult preparing to enter law school, asked her father a question that stopped him in his tracks. "Do you think justice ever finishes?" Malik thought about it. Thought about the boy he once was, the sidewalk, the courtroom, the judge's stare, the jury's silence, the video that said more than words ever could. Then he looked at her, the living, breathing embodiment of his legacy. "No," he said gently. "Justice doesn't finish, but it does pass the baton." She smiled, holding his hand. "Then I'll carry it." And as the sun set over their city, a city forever changed by one man's willingness to stand, Malik knew he had done more than survive. He had shown the world what it meant to rise. Because sometimes the most powerful change doesn't happen through force. It happens through presence, through love, through the unwavering belief that truth, when spoken with courage, always finds its voice. And sometimes that voice changes the world. And sometimes that voice changes the world, not in a thunderous roar, but in the quiet choice to show up again, to walk into the places that once broke you and rebuild something better. Malik didn't seek revenge, he sought restoration. He didn't want the officers who hurt him to rot. He wanted them to understand. He didn't ask the system for favors. He demanded it do what it was built to do. And that subtle shift in his heart, that's what made the difference The courthouse that once echoed with the sound of dismissive laughter now displayed a framed photo of Malik next to the words, "Truth is not dangerous, silence is." He had gone from suspect to survivor to symbol, but he never let it go to his head. Because Malik knew symbols don't change the world, people do. He kept showing up for the hard things. He mentored young men pulled from similar streets, guiding them not with pity, but with purpose. He volunteered at the police academy, not to scold, but to speak truth, and he spent his mornings walking the same sidewalk where it all began, smiling at strangers, nodding at officers, walking like a man who carried no bitterness, only clarity. One day, a young officer stopped him. "Sir, I just wanted to say, thank you. I saw the footage. I saw your testimony. It changed the way I think. I want to be better because of you." Malik smiled, paused, and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Then you already are. Change doesn't come overnight. It comes with one person refusing to be erased, with one story refusing to stay buried, with one father teaching his daughter that dignity is louder than hate. And in a world where the truth is often twisted, silenced, or ignored, Malik proved one simple, unshakable truth. And in a world where the truth is often twisted, silenced, or ignored, Malik proved one simple, unshakable truth. That courage doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it walks alone. Sometimes it's bruised, misunderstood, or dismissed. But it moves forward anyway. He didn't ask to be a symbol. He didn't want to be a headline. He just wanted the pain to mean something, to matter. And it did, because that courtroom wasn't just a place of justice. It became a mirror. Mirror for a nation that had too often looked away. A mirror for every person who'd been silenced, who'd been told, "You're overreacting. It's just a misunderstanding." Maybe if you had complied. Malik's story stripped away excuses. It forced people to see, to feel, to reckon. But more importantly, it gave them permission to speak up, permission to hold the line, permission to believe that they mattered too. From a broken sidewalk to a courtroom bench to the quiet hearts of people who'd never met him, Malik left behind more than just a verdict. He left behind a path, not paved with ease, but with truth, with purpose, with a light that says, you are not alone, you are not invisible, and your story deserves to be told.